that's probably one of the skill sets that you're dealing with that is probably the least, studied and applied. Most of us have a real natural tendency to use the right wrist. You know what I'm saying? But
I use a hammer. I can break anything.
Yeah.
You want to see my butt?
But it's a lot more. Most of the time when we use the brake, it's like, oh, I've got to get slowed down so I can get this thing turned so I can get back on the gas. And we don't really give the brakes and what's going on there very much thought, other than, it's almost the necessity that we don't really deal with very much, Well, the reason that your instructor can usually catch you corner entry is because you're not using the brakes like he is. Okay? That you've got to, Ty Howard will tell you, if you don't know how to use the brakes, you can't ever go very fast. Because it's like standing on the edge of a cliff. If you stand on the edge of the cliff, your brain's not going to let you jump off if it knows you don't have a parachute. Okay? He's trying to maximize or actually eliminate all the coast time out of his game. Now, I know that's a pretty tall order if I were to tell you, okay guys, no coasting on the track.
That's a big goal.
It's a major deal, One of the things we'd like to get across to you, just in general, in the course material, is to get you to understand why you're doing what you're doing. Not just follow me, here's the line. Why are you doing that? I'd like for you to understand some of the fundamental and basic concepts that make all that work. Braking. Ty will also tell you there's two controls on the motorcycle. One's the gas, and one's the brake. You're controlling one of those all the time. You're using one of those to control the bike all the time. If you're not, where are you at? He says you're out of control. And don't want to pick on anybody, and I don't know the particulars, but I would tell you that there's a good chance that the guy that ran off before we went into the carousel right here, that was an issue. Because what I want you to think about is what goes on when you come into the turn. That's where you're going to use the brakes the most, isn't it? That's probably the most difficult part of the whole game, too, is corner entry. If you don't get that right, you won't get any of it right. You know what I mean? You're going to end up in a bad situation if you don't get corner entry right. Some things I'd like you to understand about corner entry and braking is the geometry of the bike, number one. Maybe you know what rake and trail is. Guys, your bike, most of your bikes, late model sport bikes, are set up and manufactured. They come from the technology that comes from MotoGP level and is filtered all the way down through. The bike manufacturer creates the bike in that regard, okay? Most of these bikes are set up to where when you're on the brake, what happens? The nose is down, right? What that does is that reduces the rake and trail figures on the bike setup, and it will cause the bike to be much easier to steer. Okay? If you're having trouble turning into a corner, think about this process. And I'm not talking about just braking all the way to the apex, but I want you to understand the concept that I'm trying to get you to understand, and that is, Nathan and I talked about this a great deal last night. I'm really a little bit struggling with it, quite honestly, just to figure out how to get it across to you. But if the bike is set up to turn on the brakes, that's usually where you are going into the turn, right? The problem is that a lot of you are getting off the brake prior to turning the bike in. How many are doing that? Okay? Let me tell you you might want to think about in regard to that, okay? When you have the bike nose down, steering geometry is where the bike wants to turn. But it also, you've got a great amount of weight transferred onto the front tires, okay? Most of you, in fact, probably all of you, know about contact patch, don't you? Okay? When you can play with this tire, when Nathan was, now we're doing this last week, kind of dim a bit out here to take it outside, but when you just have it sitting here with no pressure on it, it's pretty easy to move. You can just put just a very slight bit of pressure on it and the tire begins to stick to the ground, okay? And if you take an old tire like this and just look inside of it, and when you put any pressure on it at all, you can see the contact patch swell up on it, okay? Now, let me ask you something. Going into the corner, when you go into the corner, and you're looking for, that's where you need the traction, right? It's not going down the straightaway. It's in the corner you need the traction. And you need the traction in your steering mechanism. You've got the front end down, you're able to steer the bike, but then all of a sudden you let off the brake, what happens? The geometry goes from being here to being here when you let off the gas, okay? I mean when you let off the brake. When you go to neutral throttle, the bike will sit up like this. Now what has that done to your steering geometry? It makes it harder to turn the bike. So if you're coming into the turn and you're on the brakes, and right before you turn the bike, you off the brakes, what have you done to your steering geometry? You've hurt yourself, haven't you? Also, what happens is if you're off the brake right there, you lose that contact patch because you're taking all the weight off the front end. What you need to do is realize that that's part of my steering mechanism, is the brake. I'm coming into the corner, and as I turn the bike, I'm going to start letting the pressure off. But I really want a little bit of pressure on the front end of the bike. Now that's not a lot. That's a little bit. Okay? And you can play with this, but as you come into the corner, you want to have the brake on, not hard brake. You start giving the brake back as you turn the bike in, and you trail it off as you make that turn. Okay? What that does is that keeps your bike in the proper geometry. It allows you to turn easier, and it also gives you a bigger contact patch so that you don't wash out the front end or run off the track. Okay? Don't let it go and then make the turn. You actually have a better shot at getting to that corner safely at a better rate of speed if you'll use the front brake just to let your bike set up. If you're on the gas real hard and you let off the throttle, what happens? The geometry of the bike goes forward a little bit, okay? So a lot of times, if you're thinking about what's going on with your steering mechanism and your brakes, a lot of times if you want to steer in here, but you're afraid of running off the track right there, just momentarily set the bike up with just barely any brake or even off throttle, you know, when you're turning right there. Come around and you can actually brake from this point all the way to here in your turn very lightly. It'll actually, you keep the front end down right here, it'll actually help your bike go ahead and make this turn. Now you have to be cautious with it. We're not talking about hard brake. We're talking about just barely enough to turn the brake light on to keep the bike in that posture. Okay?